Kate Chaney, welcome to the program.
Thanks, David.
Now, energy prices are a little bit different in your home state, WA, due to the gas reservation policy that's been in place in the state for some time. Nonetheless, what do you think should be done about this energy price problem generally?
It's obviously a huge challenge, and I think it's a good sign that the government is open-minded to a range of options, although they will need to make a decision shortly. I think there is a good case to be made for a short-term super profits tax on gas exports, really to make sure that we're looking after the most vulnerable, and the most vulnerable at the moment is not our gas companies.
So you'd suggest taxing them with some sort of windfall or super profits tax and using that revenue to help those who are struggling the most with their power bills?
Whatever we do, it needs to be short-term. I think that would be potentially a better solution than the export controls or price controls that end up being quite hard to reverse. But obviously, you know, the second tier of options would be those export controls or price controls. In Western Australia, we have the domestic gas reservation, which was put in place 15 years ago, and has been very effective. One of the problems with it, though, is that it's not a long-term solution for decarbonisation, and it can really embed gas in the energy mix for a longer time. So,
well, I want to ask you about that because that's an interesting point. Just on the idea of a windfall tax on the big gas companies, I mean, how would this go down in WA, in your electorate in particular, where we know there's a different attitude towards resources companies sometimes?
Yeah, it's true. I mean, it's really challenging, but I think we have to look at the options that are available and pick the least bad option. So I'm sure there'll be some resistance to it, but looking at who's suffering and what the potential paths are out of this, I think it's the best of bad choices.
So gas then, I mean, you're in favour of stronger action on climate change, and the government's committed to. There is this issue now about getting more gas supply into the market. Are you saying that we don't need more supply, that we shouldn't be necessarily opening up new gas fields? What role should gas be playing? Well,
in the short term, we absolutely need smooth transition, but we can't lose sight of the longer term goal to decarbonise our economy so that we actually have a strong economy in 20 years' time too. So I think it's really important that we focus on that these are fossil fuel issues that are driving the challenges that we have now, and we focus on that longer term goal to decarbonise.
But should new gas projects be opened up?
I don't think so. I think globally, when you look at the cost and benefit of that, there are enough gas projects that are already approved to meet the gas needs that we need in the energy mix for a long period. And so opening up new oil and gas exploration sites that won't be developed for between 4 and 10 years seems like really mixed messages that we're sending to the market.
So you've called for a windfall tax. Can I ask you about another tax question? That's the stage 3. We were just talking about it there. We've got now the forecast that inflation is still going to be a bit of a problem in 2024. You've been critical of these stage 3 tax cuts. Just tell us what you think should happen.
There's no doubt that over the long term we need tax reform, and we are relying too heavily on personal income tax in that mix, and we need to look at alternatives like consumption tax or different ways of building that relationship with our fossil fuel companies. But at this point, it seems to me that the stage 3 tax cuts are not very responsible policy. I can understand the government's desire to keep its promises, but when you look at where we are, really that there is nothing to take the place of the revenue lost in those tax cuts. So it needs to be part of a broader review of how we're going to pay for the things that we need.
But should they be scrapped altogether or just trimmed at the top?
I reckon they should be delayed pending a broader review of the tax system. And it may be that a result of that could be trimming them, at the top, or it could be looking at different sources of revenue that mean we can rely less on personal income tax as we see our population age.
Again, how does this go down with your constituents? Because you represent one of the wealthiest electorates in the country. What do they think about that sort of position on stage 3 tax cuts?
Well, like in any electorate, there's a mix of different views, but I've had a whole lot more contact from constituents who think that it is not responsible to implement those stage 3 tax cuts.
Even if they're going to benefit from them?
Yeah, well, the thing that I've found really interesting in my electorate is a lot of the time people actually are not only driven by self-interest, and there is this sense that they're keen to ensure that we do have a strong and robust economy that continue to deliver on the things that we need.
Let me turn to industrial relations. Before I get to the concession that Tony Burke's just announced this morning on one element of it, what do you think generally of the bill that's before Parliament? It includes quite a few different reforms, but the most contentious is multi-employer bargaining.
The bill definitely does some things that need to be done. So there are some good things in it. And I'm completely supportive of the fact that we need to increase wages and increase the share of wages of GDP. I think the expansion, the multi-employer bargaining for the supported stream is a good thing, that those low-paid industries, and that may well get wages
like
moving.
Childcare,
aged care, largely feminised industries, and that seems to make a lot of sense. I'm concerned about the overreach and this extension of multi-employer bargaining to any group that are deemed to have a common interest as determined by the Fair Work Commission. I think it's great for IR specialists and lawyers. It's probably great for unions and improving their relevance. I'm not convinced that it actually will drive an increase in wages across the board, because it just adds this new layer of complexity into our already very complex system.
So would you prefer to see a carve out there, only multi-employer bargaining in those sectors you mentioned, but not in mining and other sectors of the economy?
Yeah, I mean, the way it's structured, there are these multiple different streams or options on multiple employer bargaining, and one of them is this common interest or single interest stream. The bill could work very effectively in those low-paid sectors without including that.
The Minister, as I mentioned, did announce this morning that the one change he's willing to make in every workplace under a multi-employer deal, a majority of workers would have to want that to take effect. Does that look like a sensible move? Would that win you over?
Look, I think it's a sensible move. It seems to me, and it's good that government is willing to have those discussions and move on some of those things.
But it's not enough?
I think there is still a huge amount of uncertainty with what the Fair Work Commission will consider to be a common interest, and that could include competitors bargaining together. It could include geographic groupings, and I think that we'll end up with a lot of stuff ending up in the Fair Work Commission that just delays agreements from being made.
So where are you at the moment on this? Would you vote for this bill or against this bill?
As I said, it does a lot of good things, and one of the real challenges of voting on a bill is you have to pick yes or no when life is a whole lot more complicated than that.
So where are you at now?
Well, I think I would resist it. I would vote against it at the moment because of that overreach, and if that could be confined to the area of low-paid workers, plus the improvements to the boot test, the better offer overall test, which is great, some of the gender equity stuff, I think it's really strong, but I'm just worried it will create a lot of complexity in an already complex
Would it be better
system.
to split the bill, as some have suggested?
I think that would it would get my support if it could be split into the non-controversial and the more controversial parts.
I'm interested in what sort of consultation, briefing. I mean, the government doesn't need your vote necessarily in the lower house. It has a majority there. But has it been consultative on this?
The crossbench was briefed by the government last week. I would have liked to have seen some earlier discussion on that. It didn't allow a lot of time, and I certainly haven't had time to consult in my community very, very widely. It's pretty complicated to even understand what it's about, let alone form views on it. And for small businesses especially, it's going to take some time. So the government has been, has included the crossbench in those briefings, but very short time period.
More generally, how are you finding Parliament nearly 6 months on from the election? I mean, we were told at the time when a lot of independents came into the Parliament, things would change. We'd see a more cooperative, productive Parliament. Is that how it's turning out to be?
I'm still optimistic about it, and I think there have been some good signs that government is interested in working collaboratively with the crossbench. Obviously, there are always things that could be done better, but by all accounts, it's a whole lot more collaborative than it has been under previous parliaments, and I think that's a really good thing.
What about question time?
I still have some challenges with question time. I don't think it's the best use of our parliamentary time, and I'll continue to work with the government and the opposition on how we can make that a bit more constructive.
Well, have you got any ideas as to how you'd fix question time?
Well, I think it'd be great to see fewer Dorothy Dixes and perhaps some more electorate-based questions. And then what we often get is the same question pushed over and over again, and it's mostly political. Not a lot of it is policy-based. So I think if you listen to question time, some of the most sensible questions are coming from the crossbench.
I suspect your colleagues on the crossbench would agree with that. Look, finally, we saw this week vigils and rallies around the country for Cassius Turvey, the Indigenous teenager killed while walking home from school in Perth. A 21-year-old man has been charged with murder. Police are investigating allegations that racial slurs were used. But more broadly, how would you describe the problem and the extent of racism?
It's a huge challenge, and I was at the vigil on Wednesday, and it was very moving, and the Noongar community in Perth and the broader community is really hurting about this. On the broader issue of racism, and we don't yet know, what the motivation for that alleged murder is. I think every mum has a right to expect that her child can walk home from school safely, and I think as a community we all need to be thinking about what role we play in creating a situation where that's possible.
Kate Chaney, thanks very much for joining us.
Thanks, Dave.